Hello, everyone. It's Joyce Wheeler, case manager here at Fairfax Surrogacy. Today with me, we're talking with Jason Smith, president of International Fertility Insurances. Jason, it's wonderful to have you here. Thanks so much for chatting with me today.
My pleasure.
Of course. Jason, tell me a little bit about you. What is International Fertility Insurance, and how did you get started in this?
Sure. So it's a pleasure to work with you, of course. Thanks for having me. I've been doing insurance since 2008. Been doing surrogacy-specific insurance since 2014. And what kind of led me into that was a combination of things. I had struggled with fertility myself. Thankfully, I was able to have a successful pregnancy, but it did take some time to get there and some fertility treatments and so forth. So I know the struggle a little bit. My dad was also an obstetrician, gynecologist, so there was always sort of baby making in my blood, if you will. And then the third thing was that I used to be a real strong life insurance producer with one of the largest, or the largest, insurance company in America. And so life insurance was in my brain. And this one night I had a conversation with a friend of mine that was struggling much harder than me with fertility. He had gone through 6 rounds of IVF, and we just were sitting there talking, and he says, I think next we're going to look at surrogacy. And I was just intrigued by that. I knew what the term was, I knew the concept, but had never really deep dived into it. And the next day I started calling around to surrogate agencies thinking maybe I could, help with this in some way in insurance. And I wound up doing a lot of life insurance for surrogates. And then over time, I learned that there's much more to it. And a lot of those agencies that were using me were saying, hey, we love your service. We'd love if you could help us with maternity insurance and newborn insurance and egg donor insurance and all these things that I couldn't do as a just basic life insurance producer. So after about a few years of pondering it, I started the company. And we now work with about 250 different surrogate agencies, attorneys, and clinics that refer us, intended parents. And then we work with about 200 a month now. And so 200 sets of intended parents each month, give or take. Different things that each need. Some of them are just going through egg donation maybe, or some of them are going through everything related to surrogacy. But we have a lot of great conversations and help. And we work with about 100 different insurance companies. So we're not dedicated to any one company. We are really just ever intent on finding the best options at the most reasonable prices to cover the risks that intended parents are trying to cover.
That's awesome.
And we have a team of about 25 people at IFI. So we're known as International Fertility Insurance, or sometimes IFI, and we've got about 25 of us now.
IFI seems to be what we call you the most, just because it's easier to spit out sometimes. So, but if I'm feeling fancy, I'll use the whole name.
What we're not is iffy. Sometimes my wife, the first time I said IFI, she said iffy, and I said, we're not iffy. We're very sure about what we do.
We're confident in this.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I didn't know your full background in this, so I think most of us that are in this industry, it comes from a place of passion, and so you fit right into that. That's good to know. We're going to dive into some questions that we get asked most often. The first one is, would you be willing to share why insurance is something to consider when you are starting out in your own surrogacy journey?
Sure. So sometimes it's contractual. So some, there'll always be, well, typically there would be an attorney that is for the surrogate, an attorney that is for the intended parents, and kind of these two attorneys are working together to bring the two parties together in a way that's agreeable to everybody. And there's some pieces of the puzzle that are almost, I don't want to say they're a law, but they're like every single surrogacy contract has life insurance for the surrogate, for example. It seems every surrogacy contract has maternity insurance of some sort, meaning that there's some insurance to cover the pregnancy and delivery and the care of the surrogate from the obstetrician and so forth. And then there's some things that are more optional, I guess, but most people do buy them. because they're built for this. But there's some optional things, I guess I would say, that again, sometimes the contract will require them, but they might be contractual, they might be optional. But things like surrogate disability. So this is to cover if your surrogate were to go on bed rest or be hospitalized with complications, that her lost wages, her childcare, her housekeeping are covered. And usually the surrogacy contract will require that the intended parents are responsible for that. It's really just their choice whether they'd like to pay for that themselves or pay like a small amount to cover a large amount, which might never be needed, but it might just the same be really be needed. So sometimes the contract will require it, sometimes it won't, but that's another example. Surrogate IVF complications is something that it's optional, but it's either that or you're covering it yourself when there's a complication related to IVF. Newborn insurance is I would argue more mandatory, but it still is seen as optional if you're not from the United States and you're having a baby in the United States, or not from any country that you're not having the baby in. Usually it's a good idea to get newborn insurance too. So some of them are contractual, some of them are optional, but they're built to reduce your risk.
Definitely. And it's one of those things that you'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So yeah, it's important. And I know at this point we are currently in open enrollment, which in the surrogacy industry, in anyone that works with insurance, it's busy season. But for those that don't know what open enrollment is or the Affordable Care Act, can you touch a little bit about what those things are?
Yep. So the Affordable Care Act, which is sometimes called ACA, is the term for the government act that was created about 10 years ago. This is being filmed in 2023. About 10 years ago, there was President Obama. So sometimes you also hear it called Obamacare. And it's just the act that made that sort of formalized the way the United States healthcare system works in relation to insurance for individuals. So sometimes we have insurance through our employer, and we would call that an employer plan in short, or a group plan. But a lot of times we don't. And so if we don't get a plan through our work, or if we're self-employed, or if we're not employed at all, then we need to find a plan, and we use the Affordable Care Act is the guideline for that. And there's a term called open enrollment, like you mentioned, and that means that we have typically about a 2-month window that we're allowed to buy these plans. And a lot of people that aren't from the United States might be confused by that. But the idea is that you're supposed to, by law, have these insurance plans, but not everybody does. You can either have it or you get a fine. And if you the 2-month window is there so that you ideally have enough time to think about what you want, but at the same time that you don't just bypass it. And then once you get cancer in June, say, oh, now I need insurance. So the idea is so that the insurance company gets a full year of insurance premium from you so that they can sort of balance out their expected costs. So that's what that is. And yep, we are in that right now. It's for the normal American, it's plenty of time. 2 months seems like it's plenty of time. In the surrogacy world, it's a short period of time because we're having to do a lot more. We're having to really look through those plans and look for, is there a surrogacy exclusion in the plan? Is there what's called a lien, which is where the surrogate's compensation is added as a extra cost to use that insurance plan. So we're looking through all those. We're trying to figure out, she's got a intended doctor and hospital she wants to use, and we want to make sure those fit the plan at a good discounted rate, so forth. So it's a lot in a 2-month period.
Yep, I was gonna say it's a lot for anyone who even knows what those items are. So for those that don't, it's just a whole new world. So I'm personally grateful for you and your team because I'm an American. I was born and raised here, but insurance is tricky. It's complicated. There's a lot of jargon that I just don't quite understand. So when we are looking for policies for our surrogates, and even additional policies just in general, we're going to reach out to you because you know what you're doing. So
Yeah. And we do actually do, it's a very complicated topic. It's meant for intended parents, but you're welcome to join too. But we do webinars twice a month during open enrollment for intended parents to join and just learn about it in depth. And we'll also, of course, offer consultations with them too. So
awesome. Where would be the best place for someone who's interested in those events to go to figure out where and when those are happening?
yeah, for those or for anything you might want educationally, we just again, depending when you watch this, it might be outdated information, but we just did a massive update to our website, and we have the website is goifi.com. So www.goifi.com. And if you were on that page, you go to the top, there's a section called resources. You drop down from there and there's an events tab, and you just click events, and then all of our webinars are listed there. And we do them during open enrollment, but then even throughout the rest of the year, we have typically maybe one or two events each month for intended parents, just about insurance in general. And there's a whole lot of other things at the website. There's a video library that talks about everything we do and various slides that they can look at and so forth.
Awesome. Well, we'll be sure to include that link on this. And then, of course, if anything is updated later, we'll be sure to update it. But at this point, we'll definitely include that link so people can go to it, check it out. And I'm happy to put anyone in contact with you or team directly. We've done that many times in the past. And I'm pretty sure that there is a form that we can utilize too.
Yeah.
Seems to be a streamlined way. So one way or another, who wants to get connected is going to get connected. So we did touch on it a little bit, and I wanted to kind of dive into it a little bit deeper. There's multiple types of insurance that people can look into. We have maternity, newborn life, things like that. Can you speak briefly on each of those,
Sure.
and kind of what they're meant for?
Yeah, so I'll speak really briefly on them now, just in the interest of keeping this, keeping everyone's attention. But again, you can go to our website and learn more about any of these. There's sections on each one of them. There's videos on each one of them. So you can go to goifi.com and find everything you need in more depth. But it sort of starts, if I could kind of think through a timeline, the very first thing that we need to do is look at your surrogate's insurance and see, assuming she has insurance, and see, does it or does it not cover surrogacy? Again, you would think, well, why wouldn't it, right? You just told me all about this Affordable Care Act that's supposed to be great. But the thing is that insurance companies really lose by covering a surrogate. Usually for you or I, we will have our insurance plan for the next 10 years, and maybe we're going to have one kind of bad thing happen throughout those 10 years. But when you're trying to cover a surrogate pregnancy, you might be buying it in January and getting pregnant, a big, huge medical event in March or February right away. So it's just not a good deal for the insurance company. But some of them, of course, will still cover it. So what we're doing is we're looking to see, is surrogacy excluded or not? So a health insurance review is really the starting point. Next up, you then, based on that outcome, just the topic of maternity insurance, I guess, is where it all starts. If her insurance will cover, we have something called a backup maternity plan that's there just in case her insurance changes, or if you don't deliver within the policy year, her insurance could change at its renewal or so forth. If it won't cover surrogacy, then you're either going to look at one of these ACA plans like we just talked about, the Affordable Care Act open enrollment plans, if you will. Or if the timing isn't right, that you're not matched up with open enrollment, we have what we call the IFI surrogacy maternity plan, which is not just Jason's insurance plan that I created. It is something I created, but it's backed up by an enormous company called Lloyd's of London that's over 300 years old. So it's a great plan that's available year round. So one way or another, we've got to cover the maternity, which is the pregnancy, the delivery, the obstetrician, all the care throughout the pregnancy and delivery and postpartum. In addition to that, like I said, the other one that's like really, really required almost is life insurance for the surrogate. She's doing a great thing for you as intended parents. Um, and sadly, once in a blue moon, she does actually pass away. We might have maybe one a year out of thousands, but it once every year or two, we sadly somebody passes away, and so there's insurance for that. Um, and the amount of insurance we won't get into today. It's going to vary by your contract or your agency, but there'll be some amount that goes to the surrogate. And then we also have the ability for intended parents to be covered as well. Not that if you passed away, but rather if she passes away, that you can get the amount that you've spent on surrogacy and egg donation related to this pregnancy back to you, so that while you might be horribly sad, at least financially you could be back to zero and start over again, and try again perhaps, or at least just walk away without having a big loss. On that policy, there's some things that you can add on, which again sort of speak to the different parts of the surrogacy contract. There's something called loss of reproductive organs, which covers if she needs a hysterectomy, a partial hysterectomy, loses an ovary, loses a fallopian tube or a uterus. Usually that's something in the contract that you're responsible for, that this again can cover instead. Then you have, I'm just going to close my Outlook. Then you have the what's called permanent disability, which is if she if she doesn't pass away, but rather has an injury, there's some coverage for that. There's stillbirth coverage, which is something that we created at IFI. That is, sadly, she doesn't pass away, but sadly, you might lose the baby or fetus after week 20, is how the policy is currently written. We have coverage for that. So there's all these different, add-on coverages that you can opt in or out to depending on your risk management. There's also something called, which is a kind of different category now, surrogate disability insurance. And that is, again, like I mentioned earlier, I believe, covering her lost wages, childcare, and housekeeping if she's on bed rest or has complications that hospitalize her during the pregnancy. With that, you're either choosing to cover her, which might be, say, $1,500 a week or $2,000 a week or something like that, to cover her wages, her childcare, her housekeeping, or there's a policy you can buy that will do that for you. We have something called IVF complications insurance, which can either be for a donor or a surrogate, and they both work similarly. It's while they're going through the IVF process, if they have complications like allergic reaction to the medication, bleeding, cramping. On the surrogacy side, it could be an ectopic pregnancy. On the donor side, it could be overstimulation. Any of these things, if she's going to the emergency room or the hospital related to the IVF treatment, there's coverage for that. And I think the last one would be newborn insurance. So this is really mostly applicable to parents to be that are from outside the country where the birth is going to be. So for example, if you're from Spain and you're having a baby in the United States, your Spanish insurance typically will not cover a baby being born in the United States. So we have newborn insurance that can be purchased instead. Many different kinds of it. It kind of evolves through the year, but bottom line is we have both insurance as well as we have a management service to help not only reduce bills, but help kind of organize the process for you. And we do that same sort of management thing on the maternity side as well. So that's the highlights of what are the different types of insurance. I know it sounds like a lot, but when you engage with us, we'll start by sending you some information to review at your leisure, and then we'll offer you a link to schedule a consultation. And it sounds probably pretty overwhelming when you hear it right now, but we do 5 or 10 of these a day, and we're more than happy to guide you until you feel comfortable.
Absolutely. No, it is a lot. It's overwhelming to hear, but you guys do such a good job at breaking it down and really giving the information that is specific to what they're going through. You break it down, information is passed on, you have pamphlets, you have a lot of information but you're able to compose it so well for our families. I've yet to have anyone come back feeling as overwhelmed as they did when they first talked to you. So you're doing a good job.
All right.
Um, I think the last question that I would have for you today is, at what point in the journey would the intended parents need to purchase insurance? Is there a specific timeline for that, or how does that part work?
So we're like 99% done with a little helpful guide that we've been working on. So by the time anyone's actually watching this, it'll be done. I think it'll be done by the end of this week, actually. But it's all that information I talked about. We're pulling it back into this really basic 3-page guide that anyone can have access to whenever they want. But it's a very mini explanation of each of the things I talked about. But then on the 3rd page at the bottom, there's a when to order guide. And I think that can be real helpful, and it'll be updated as anything changes, of course. But in short, almost all of this, you'll want to be starting to ponder after you've gotten to what most would call medical clearance or legal clearance, or both of those, frankly. When you've got not just a match, but a viable situation where the surrogate has been cleared medically, psychologically, legally, that you're really ready to move forward now. Now, she hasn't started medication yet. She's not going through IVF yet, but you've kind of got to the point where you know that's about to happen. That's usually where we'll be introduced. Most of the products that we talked about, you need to buy before, to make them, to get the best bang for the money, if you will. You want to be buying them before she starts medication, because which will predate her IVF transfer by about a month, give or take, a little bit less, but about that. So you've got some time between the clearance to when she starts that. They'll set up a schedule, they'll do some tests, and then she would start. So in that period of time is usually where we're introduced, and usually you want to try to make your decisions before she starts medication, because a lot of the products will start at that start of medication. Some of the other ones will start when she reaches what we call confirmation of pregnancy, but you might still order them in advance, and then as soon as confirmation of pregnancy actually happens, a form is provided that says we've got confirmation of pregnancy, and then boom, the policy is ready to start. So generally speaking, bottom line is around medical clearance usually.
Awesome. We work really hard with our insurance providers, and we also try to connect our families, typically even before they've found a match. It's usually in the beginning, just to get them familiar with the process, and then again, kind of reintroducing everybody when everything kind of goes in place, when we have that surrogate, we have that match. But it's a lot of information, and it takes some time to process. So but again, we're grateful that you have this information and we have your information, so we can just streamline that process for those families. So yeah, that was really the gist of our questions, just to keep it short and understand the basics. So I want to thank you for your time today. Again, I know you're super busy. And I want to thank thanks everyone for joining the webinar. If there's questions about insurance, any of my families that want to connect directly with Jason and his team, you can come to our website at fairfaxsurrogacy.com. You can also connect with Jason, like you said earlier, at the www.goifi.com. Is there any other way that a family could connect with you that you want to share, or is that the main one?
Yeah, so at the website in the upper right corner, there's 2 buttons. There's one that says refer a client, and that's for an agency like Fairfax to refer a client, right? So the introduction can come that way, or right next to that button to the right, it says get started. And so an intended parent can go there on their own if they like, and say, hey, they would tell us that they're working with Fairfax, for example, or that they're not committed yet and they're just figuring things out. They want more information about one of the things they heard about today. There's either way, it's basically going to open up a pretty simple form that takes maybe a minute to fill out, that asks what are you interested in talking about, and then by using either one of those forms, it creates a client record for us and gets everything moving. And then we actually check our referral inbox, if you will, every hour during business hours, that is, during the business week. And so we'll be back to you pretty promptly. But I think it actually shows in my picture there. You can email me directly. You might get me, you might get Nicole, who usually is the one that monitors all those things. But she and I probably talk about 10 times a day about all the referrals that are coming in and just how to best guide them. So you can email me. It's jsmith@goifi.com, or you can, reach us through the website's probably slightly more efficient, but either way.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us. And we will definitely get this information passed around. If anyone has questions, we know how to reach you, and otherwise reach me and I'll reach you. But one way or another, we will get connected. And I will let you go and get back to your busy schedule. But again, thank you for joining us today.
All right, my pleasure. Take care.